right, well, I don't see anybody in our waiting room, so we'll just get started here on this intro, and then we'll give some extra time for folks to log on. So thank you again for joining us this evening. This is our Wednesday webinar series, and tonight we are talking about the wilderness recommendation process in this revision. Next slide. So just an agenda of what we'll go through tonight. First, we'll just have a few staff introductions. Then we'll move into the ground rules and some Zoom tips. Then we'll have our webinar presentation, which will be followed by a question and answer session. So just some introductions. My name is Erin Matthews. I am the Tongass Revision Plan Coordinator for the Forest. I will be facilitating with Erin Lynn Nesser. She's our Senior Planner from the Pacific Planning Service Group, which is part of the Forest Service, and they're assisting the Tongass in this large revision effort. So both of us will be able to facilitate and help answer some of those questions that you might have. Next slide. So just some meeting ground rules. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted to our revision website, which is that QR code that you see in the corner there. It takes us a couple days to get it up there, so I've had folks reaching out, so just know that it will be posted under our media library, and closed captioning will be available on the recorded version of the presentation. If you could please keep your microphones turned off for the duration of the meeting until our question and answer session, that'd be greatly appreciated. And questions will be addressed during the question and answer session at the end of our PowerPoint presentation. Next slide. So just some Zoom tips and tricks for those of us who are new to Zoom. That Q&A button is where you can put questions throughout the presentation. Those will go directly to the revision team throughout that presentation. The chat will be used for relevant website links and mailing addresses. You can direct message the host as well. And if you experience any technical issues, you can also put those through the chat. The raise hand will be used during the question and answer session to ask a verbal question. So if you want to do so, you'll have that opportunity, and sometimes it's hidden underneath that reactions smiley face there with the arrow next to it to look for that raised hand feature. Next slide. All right, so I think we've gotten everybody into the meeting. I just want to start off by saying the Forest Service is working with Society for Wilderness Stewardship as subject matter experts. We've partnered with them to support this land management plan revision component, and they're working very closely with all the subject matter experts on the Tongass National Forest. With that said, this is still a Tongass decision, but they're integral to completing that work. They have the expertise and capacity to help us accomplish this work and to be responsive to the public, what they need, so we can work towards a better product for the public. So with that said, we have Kat Lyons with us tonight, the Wilderness Planning Director with Society for Wilderness Stewardship, and she will talk to us about the wilderness recommendation process in this plan revision. Kat?
Great, thank you so much, Erin. It's great to be with you all. So as Erin mentioned, this webinar will focus on the wilderness recommendation process associated with the Tongass Land Management Plan revision. We're going to provide an overview of this process, some information on how to stay involved in the land management plan revision, and have time to address all of your questions at the end of this presentation. So really appreciate the time. So brief agenda for my section of the presentation. The Forest Service has already gone over how to navigate Zoom. If you have any technical issues, she stated that we can just send a message to the chat. I'm going to quickly go over some staff introductions for our team, an overview of the wilderness recommendation process, and then just leave room for a question and answer. So quick staff introductions. As Erin mentioned, we're working very closely with the Forest Service to support the Tongass Land Management Plan. Our lead is Sharon Symes. She works for Region 10 Wilderness and Trails Program Manager for the Forest Service. As Erin mentioned, my name is Kat Lyons, and I'm the Wilderness Planning Director for the Society for Wilderness Stewardship. And I also have my colleague, Vic Jarvis, who's the Wilderness Information Director for SWS. Just a little bit about SWS as an organization. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, and our mission is to promote excellence in the professional practice of wilderness stewardship, science, and education to really ensure those life-sustaining benefits of wilderness. We've been lucky to work since 2005 with partnerships across all 4 land management agencies, supporting the management of nearly half of the wilderness areas across the United States. We provide capacity, training, and career advancement for land management professionals across the nation. We're also extremely grateful to work closely with the Tongass National Forest for this project and all the specialists to bring our expertise to support this component of the land management plan. So just a brief context, what is wilderness? Congress passed the Wilderness Act of 1964 to establish the National Wilderness Preservation System. And this is a national network of more than 800 federally designated wilderness areas across the country. So Congress designates wilderness areas through legislation. Agencies such as the Forest Service manage those lands in compliance with the Wilderness Act. You can see some of the language here. In the next few slides, I'm going to discuss how the wilderness recommendation process assesses lands within the Tongass National Forest to see if any additional areas within the forest should be recommended to Congress to be considered for inclusion in the National Wilderness Preservation System. Just a little bit about the Tongass. The Tongass National Forest is one of the most wild places in the country with unparalleled opportunities for recreation. The Tongass currently has 19 designated wilderness areas that account for approximately 1/3 of the forest. You can see on the map here on the right. And communities in Southeast Alaska have a strong relationship with the Tongass, including the past, present, and future generations of the Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian people who depend on these lands for their way of life since time immemorial. This relationship is acknowledged in the management of wilderness areas in Alaska, where management must meet both the Wilderness Act and special provisions established in the Alaska National Interest Land Conservation Act, also known as ANOCA. So for example, access by motorized and mechanized equipment such as airplanes, public use cabins, temporary facilities for hunting and fishing are permitted in designated wilderness areas in Alaska. These wilderness landscapes across the Tongass contain intact ecosystems, making these areas important for local residents, visitors, recreationists, scientists, and researchers. And the Tongass National Forest and its managers work hard to manage these areas for the use and enjoyment of future generations. So in a previous webinar in this series, you learned why the Forest Service is working to revise their land management plan and the components of the plan. Just a reminder, the Tongass National Forest Land Management Plan was originally developed over 25 years ago in 1997. It has been amended since. You can see an example here in 2016. Many things have changed since the original land management plan was developed 25 years ago, and so the objective of this revision is to really address these changing conditions, integrate the best available science, and identify any potential new threats to the resource. So in addition, this plan will comply with the new planning regulation, which we often refer to as the 2012 planning rule, which states that the Forest Service has to update the land management plan as conditions change, or at least every 15 years. So this plan revision process really aims to identify the best approaches for managing lands and resources within the Tongass now and into the future. And wilderness recommendation is but one of many options for land management across the Tongass. These plans serve a vital role of integrating resources and providing public engagement in the management of public lands. This is really an opportunity for you all to be actively involved and share your ideas on how you want to see these lands be managed over the next 15 years. In another webinar, you also may have heard the term parallel process. So the wilderness recommendation process is one of 3 parallel processes in the land management plan effort. The other 2 are wild and scenic river eligibility and species of conservation concern. These are all required elements of the larger forest land management plan revision process. If you'd like to learn more about those parallel processes, you can check back into this series or on the Forest Service website. This wilderness recommendation process that we're talking about today, as I stated, is a required element of the forest land management plan revision. In this process, we will inventory national forest system lands within the boundary of the Tongass National Forest, evaluate if those lands are suitable for inclusion in the National Wilderness Preservation System, and provide a range of alternatives for the forest supervisor to consider in the draft environmental impact statement. It's up to the forest supervisor to determine whether additional areas, if any, should be recommended to Congress for inclusion in the National Wilderness Preservation System. And we always like to note that it's only a recommendation and only Congress can designate wilderness. So what is this wilderness recommendation process? As previously mentioned, this is a required element of the forest plan revision process, and we'll be assessing and analyzing the entire Tongass National Forest to see if any additional areas within the forest should be recommended to Congress to be considered for inclusion in the National Wilderness Preservation System. So on this slide, you can see that there are 4 primary steps in this process, each building off of the previous and gradually narrowing the lands under consideration. Since we're required to evaluate the entirety of the Tongass National Forest, we really aim to include the public early and often throughout this process outlined here. And in the next few slides, I'm going to go into a bit more detail than you'd like about these processes, using kind of a conceptual model and when we expect to provide the public with opportunities to comment. So first, we start with the inventory. We plan to share a draft inventory on the wilderness recommendation process with you all coming in late spring, early summer, and this will be the first of multiple public input opportunities for this process. So as I mentioned in the following few slides, I'm going to use a conceptual model, so really just some shapes on the page to show you how we look at the Tongass National Forest lands for wilderness recommendation process. So the inventory begins by looking at all lands within the boundary of the Tongass National Forest. So this is just the symbol of the boundary in the green square. We then remove lands not managed by the Forest Service, areas in white here, designated wilderness areas, existing roads, utility lines, pipelines, and other improvements. So the remaining land parcels shown in green are included in the inventory and move forward to the second step, whereas the white areas here are excluded from the inventory. We then move to the next step, which is evaluation. So those lands still considered after the inventory, so those green parcels in the last slide, are then evaluated for wilderness characteristics. You can see the examples of the 5 criteria we are required to evaluate on this slide. And wilderness characteristics are the conditions of the land that may qualify areas to be recommended to Congress for wilderness designation. So working with the Tongass National Forest specialists and staff, getting public feedback, we determine which areas, if any, have wilderness characteristics. So the end product of this evaluation phase will actually be a qualitative description that will be shared to the public of each area's wilderness characteristics and explain the degree to which they meet the 5 identified criteria. So for example, we may ask questions of you all thinking about the natural element. Are there large areas of invasive species present? Another thing to consider are there other features of ecological, scientific, educational, scenic, or historic value? And those are just a couple questions that we're going to ask during this evaluation. So we're currently scheduled to release the draft evaluation to the public in the spring of 2025. Next, step 3 is the analysis. So using that evaluation information, that qualitative summary, the responsible official, in this case, the forest supervisor, will decide which areas to include for further analysis in the draft environmental impact statement, also known as the DEIS. So for example, when we're looking at our conceptual model, the forest supervisor has decided that the dark green area with the blue arrow not be included in any of the alternatives in the draft environmental impact statement because it has contaminated areas from past mining operations and cleanup of the site requires heavy equipment, which is often not in compliance with the Wilderness Act. Another quick example, the dark green area with the pink arrows here will not be included in any of the alternatives in the draft EIS because these lands are less than 5,000 acres and are not adjacent to designated wilderness areas or other lands that are highly protected, making it difficult for managers to manage it as wilderness. So these are just 2 very quick examples of why a responsible official, a forest supervisor, could decide not to recommend some lands for further analysis and the draft environmental impact statement. Now, as you can see, the light green are lands that are going to be included, the dark green are areas we're evaluating, and white is excluded from the analysis. So the forest supervisor, informed by the evaluation, the interdisciplinary planning team, and your input, will decide which range of alternatives will move forward in the draft environmental impact statement. So the examples I'm about to show on the slide illustrate a possible range of alternatives for areas to consider for recommendation, but does not represent a decision made. So for example, you can see alternative A represents no recommended wilderness, so all areas are excluded in white. Alternative B represents a smaller amount of recommended wilderness in the draft environmental impact statement. Alternative C, larger amount, and alternative D represents all areas from the inventory as recommended wilderness. So the draft environmental impact statement will include a range of alternatives and outline how these alternatives would impact other resources and values of the Tongass. Recommended wilderness is but one of the many options available for managing these lands, and the draft EIS will be another opportunity for formal public comment. And last but not least, once the public comment is incorporated from the draft environmental impact statement into the final environmental impact statement, and it is complete, the forest supervisor will use that analysis, the public input, and other factors to decide which areas, if any, to recommend to Congress for wilderness designation. So for example, alternative C, it represents some amount of recommended wilderness shown in green here. So this means that the forest supervisor has recommended these lands represented in green to be considered for inclusion in the National Wilderness Preservation System to ensure their wilderness character is preserved for future generations as part of the National Wilderness Preservation System. While we are required to conduct this 4-step process that I just went through, there is no requirement that lands have to be recommended for wilderness designation by the forest supervisor. So until Congress decides to designate these lands recommended for inclusion in the National Wilderness Preservation System, these lands will be managed in accordance with the new direction in the revised land management plan that we're working hard on to preserve the characteristics that would make them good additions for the National Wilderness Preservation System. And it's just important to note again that the forest supervisor recommends these lands to Congress, but however, only Congress can designate federally managed lands as wilderness. So that was a lot of information. So I just want to provide a quick recap of those 4 steps and this process. So the wilderness recommendation process is a required element of the forest land management plan. In this process, we will inventory National Forest System lands within the boundary of the Tongass, evaluate if these lands are suitable for inclusion in the National Wilderness Preservation System, provide a range of alternatives for the forest supervisor to consider in the draft environmental impact statement, and the forest supervisor will determine if any additional areas should be recommended in the final EIS and the record of decision to Congress for inclusion in the National Wilderness Preservation System. So with that, I just want to thank you all for taking the time to learn about this upcoming wilderness recommendation process. For more information on this or how to participate in the larger public engagement for the Tongass Land Management Plan, you can visit the website, and here's the QR code that we will show many times moving forward. And really just something really important to remember, to make this plan a valuable resource for those who live in Southeast Alaska and all who enjoy the Tongass, public input is critical to this process. So really appreciative of your time tonight. We really look forward to answering questions here, but also remember all the ways you can stay involved moving forward. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Erin from the Forest Service for more information on the Q&A and how to stay involved.
Thank you, Kat. So now we will move into our question and answer session. So just another quick reminder, you can put in those questions directly into the Q&A that will go to our revision team hosting this meeting. And then we can respond to you via that. Or if you prefer, you can raise your hand to then unmute and say your question directly to Kat or our team. So either or. And if you advance one, just a reminder that all of these question and answers will be compiled and posted on our website. So just keep that in mind that they will be available for later viewing. And if we need to gather more information to better answer your questions, we will provide that information on the written summary of all the question and answers during this meeting. So the first question I have is, if an area is recommended, what would be its designation in management by the Forest Service? What would it be called, and would regulations be developed to manage it?
Thank you so much for that question. So There'll be plan components for that recommended wilderness within the revised land management plan. So whatever direction the forest decides for that recommended wilderness, that will be what it is managed as. And if there's any other questions on that, please let me know.
Yes, so just let us know if we need to elaborate any further on that question. Not seeing any coming quite yet. If you want to advance a slide, Kat, while folks are thinking about those questions. Just want to throw this up here again. This is the QR code for our plan revision website. It's the best way to stay engaged on our opportunities in person, online, office hours. There's a slew of different ways that you can reach our team and be involved. This is a screenshot from the website that gives you a quick link to send a message to our plan revision inbox. But most importantly, there is a box to sign up for email updates. So you'll get all those notifications when we do have some comment periods or new opportunities coming up. So best way to stay engaged for that. And Erin Lid did just put a link to that website in the chat as well. You can contact either Erin Lynn or myself for additional questions. My email there is on the website as well, Matthews with 1 T. But you can also reach out to our entire revision team at tongassplanrevision@usda.gov. And so I just wanted to offer up a little bit of a clarification on the last question too. Those units or those areas would be called recommended wilderness. And management direction developed through the plan would protect the characteristics that made the area a good recommendation to the National Wilderness Preservation System. So just to add to what Kat already provided us. Another question that has come up in the current Tongass Land Management Plan, are there any areas recommended for wilderness that have not been designated?
That is a fantastic question. From my recollection, I do not believe, I will definitely love to follow up with that and give you a concrete answer because I can't think of a number right now off the top of my head.
And like I said, we will post that answer in our public engagement page on our website. And I know our website had lots of buttons, but I'll actually show you some screenshots where you can find those as we move further along in our slide set. But I did actually just get some a message from our forest regional staff, and it looks like there are no recommended wilderness areas on the Tongass.
I had a feeling, but wanted to confirm. Thanks, Sharon.
Yeah, sorry, Sharon's messages are going to me. So do we have any other questions? And feel free to raise your hand and we can let you unmute and say those verbally if you would like as well. Erin Lynn did put the plan revision inbox in the chat as well as our email addresses. These are just multiple ways that you can reach out to us with any questions and or feedback or comments that you have.
Due to a brief technical issue, approximately 3 minutes of this recording was lost.
Evening from 5 to 6 p.m. So just some different opportunities for you to reach us. Next slide. And I just threw this in here because sometimes it is hard. There's so many buttons to choose from on our website. So if you're looking for our webinar recordings from this webinar and our previous and future, they will be posted to the webinar, or excuse me, the media library. The engagement opportunities that I've been highlighting, those are all listed under Get Involved. So there's different options, either in person or online. And then we do have information available in the plan revision library and supplemental information for you to view as well. Next slide. Haven't seen any questions come in, but still taking those. So if you do have questions, please definitely raise your hand or add those into our Q&A or chat. Meanwhile, if you are unable to attend those in-person workshops, your input is still very important to us. So our partner Spruce Root has created an online survey that you can provide some of those visionary, what's important to you on the Tongass at this. This is a different QR code that leads you directly to that survey form, and we'll put that survey form link into our chat as well. So again, if you go to our in-person, you'll have ample opportunity to provide those comments on a slew of different subjects. But if that just doesn't work for your schedule or availability or location, you do have this opportunity as well. And of course, you can also reach out directly to our plan revision inbox, at Tongass plan revision at usda.gov. So is there any other questions that anyone has? Haven't seen any come in, but definitely want to leave that space for everyone. All right. I'm not seeing any come in, but this is definitely not your last chance. This is just our first step in this process and informational for the wilderness side of the parallel processes that we're going through. So definitely a lot more opportunities coming up that we want to engage with everyone on. So this plan revision process won't be done in a day. We have many years ahead of us on this, and we really encourage your participation and appreciate your participation in this process. So I don't see anything else coming in. So we'll stay on for the next 5 minutes here to see if there's anyone that wants a smaller crowd to ask those questions. Otherwise, that's all the material we had for you this evening. We really appreciate you spending time with us, and feel free to reach out to us with any further questions that you might think of later. So like I said, we'll just we'll wait here till 5 after, and so if you still wanted you're staying on to ask that question, we're here, and we'll end at again a few more minutes. Haley, I think we just have you. I'm not sure if you had any questions for us, but I think we'll be closing shop here unless you had anything for us.